the EU was moving on some of the crucial issues such as fisheries. So we will look at the state of the negotiation. We will look at the implementation of the withdrawal agreement. And we will also look beyond that towards the longer term relationship. Last week, we published a book, a multi-authored book on the long-term relationship between the UK and the EU, which was in part based on the discussions we've had with you, Michel Barnier, and your colleagues in the Brexit think tank group. So we're looking forward to how this long-term relationship is going to develop. But should we be optimistic? Should we believe that we will get to an ambitious and constructive long-term relationship? What are the prospects for that beyond the end of this year? So thank you again to be here at the EPC at this crucial point in time. We'll start a few words from you about where we're at in the negotiations. And then I will ask some questions that will be followed by questions from the audience. The audience can join with questions in two ways. Either they can put up their hand, there's a little button, or you can write your question, but if you write your question, please make it very brief. Also, when we unmute you, we will come to you by name, but keep the questions very brief, and I will take questions when we come to that point in sets of 3. So without further ado, Michel Barnier, the floor is yours. Despite 4 years having passed, despite COVID-19, we are still within the Brexit process. Are we getting near the end?
And thank you to all of you for tuning in. Good afternoon, and I'm very pleased to have this meeting with the European Policy Centre. You have been closely following the evolution of the EU-UK relations for the last 4 years. And to be frank, Fabienne, our task force, I'm here with my deputy, Clara Martinez, Paulina Dejmek, who is director, Mathieu Hébert. Our task force is particularly attentive to your careful analysis and recommendations. Today, so I'm very happy to be able to interact with you, even if only virtually. These are still difficult times. The coronavirus pandemic has taken hundreds of thousands of lives around the world. While the situation on our continent is improving, the virus is still present, and it continues to spread in other parts of the world, and even now, this week, in some region of Europe. So we have to remain careful and vigilant, individually and collectively, if I may say. Global and EU economies have been hit hard, despite rapid and comprehensive policy responses at both EU and national levels. The EU economy is likely to experience a recession of historic proportions this year, and dealing with the fallout from this crisis is naturally our absolute priority. It is the priority of the Commission and obviously of the President Ursula von der Leyen. In this context, Fabienne, our negotiations with the United Kingdom may appear out of touch. They were even qualified by journalists a few weeks ago as surreal. But I would argue that they are anything but surreal. Exactly 4 years ago today, we woke up to discover that the majority of UK voters has chosen to leave the EU. They set a clock ticking, a clock with very real deadlines and very real consequences. On the 31st of January this year, the UK left the EU. The political Brexit, if I may say, was only the first step. The political and institutional Brexit was only the first step. The transition period foreseen in the withdrawal agreement meant the UK could remain in the single market and in the customs unions until at least the end of 2020. We had until the 30th of June, few days from now, to choose whether to extend this transition period. This could only be done, as you mentioned, through a joint decision. But last week, at the high-level meeting with the three presidents, Ursula von der Leyen, David Sassoli, and the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson confirmed that the UK would not request such an extension. It is the UK's choice. It is the UK's choice. Therefore, the transition period will end on the 31st of December this year. The UK will then leave the EU single market and the customs union definitively. An economic Brexit will take place. It will bring real, important and definitive changes in many areas. So, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, even in the midst of this terrible crisis, this negotiation is not surreal. To the contrary, we have a duty to be realistic on both sides. We have a responsibility to take these negotiations forward. We have a responsibility to look for an intelligent agreement, a reasonable agreement that limits the shock of the UK's departure for the single market and of the customs union, once again on both sides. In the current context, this is perhaps even more important. With that in mind, I would like to share with you today, number one, a short analysis of the state of play of this important negotiation. Number two, my outlook for the coming months. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now reached the midpoint in our negotiation calendar. But as pointed out by Ursula von der Leyen last week in the European Parliament, we are definitively not yet halfway through our work to reach an agreement. It's true that the coronavirus crisis put Brexit on the political backstage for a while. It's clear that as negotiators, our work was hindered by the particular circumstances. No physical meetings, only video conferences. But to tell you the truth, I do not think that we would have made much more progress under different circumstances. Let me tell you why. There are still very different views in the UK public debate today. On the one hand, we have the Brexiters and a good part of the Tory party keeping a very hard line, full sovereignty for the UK, fine, and no concessions, even if it means no deal. On the other hand, there is growing concern among businesses, in economic circles, and in the devolved administrations. Many have been calling for an extension of the transition period in the hope of delaying the negative economic consequences of Brexit. The EU always said it was open to this, but the UK has chosen not to take up this option. The domestic situation has translated into a twofold strategy of the UK that we have clearly seen during the previous four rounds. On the one hand, the UK refuses so far to commit to a level playing field or to appropriate safeguards for our future relationship. It insists on being able to diverge substantially from current EU rules as of the 1st of January next year on data protection, on financial services, on state aid, where the UK has given us no indication of the future framework it's planned to put in place, and also on food standards, where the UK even wants to go back on protections for geographical indications secured in the withdrawal agreement. Yet, these are not technocratic details. We are talking about essentials. We are talking about fair competition among businesses, about no backsliding on the labor, social and environmental standards that many fought so hard to obtain over the years. We are talking about safeguarding citizens' fundamental rights and making sure their sensitive personal data is protected. We are talking about mechanisms that ensure that what we eventually agree on actually gets done. On the other hand, and while refusing any of these essential preconditions, the UK is requesting a special status, one that is very close to the single market membership on financial services, or indeed other professional services, such as audit services or lawyers, and the mutual recognition of conformity assessments for goods, or the recognition of professional qualifications, and road transports or electricity trading. In all these areas, the UK wants to keep the benefits of the single market without any obligations. The UK often tells us that it is also in our interest to stick as much as possible to the status quo in these strategic areas of cooperation. But to be frank, is it really? Let me give you a telling example on rules of origin. Under the UK's proposals, British car manufacturers, for instance, could source virtually all of their car parts from countries with which we both have free trade agreements. They could then export the finished products as British, made in Britain, to the EU tariff and quota free. The UK tells us this is in both our interest. But frankly speaking, why make it easy for UK manufacturers to source nearly all their parts from elsewhere? We produce those very same parts here in the EU, and we know that 80% of the parts imported by UK car manufacturers already come from the EU. Ladies and gentlemen, nothing would justify us encouraging UK manufacturers to start sourcing their parts outside of the EU. Nothing would justify us signing away tens of thousands of European jobs for the UK's benefit. Nothing. We will do everything in our power to reach an agreement. It's still, and it remains, my way to work. We will be constructive, as we have always been, and respectful. And we are ready to be creative to find common ground. But we will never sacrifice the EU's long-term economic and political interests for the sole benefits of the UK. We will not put into question the integrity of our union, our single market, our sovereign capacity to set our own rules. Our duty is and will always remain until the end to protect the interests of the European citizens and the European businesses. This is my first key point, and let me just come to finish to the outlook for the coming months. I believe, once again, that the deal is still possible, and I welcome the fact that the UK has agreed to intensify talks during the summer, beginning next week, to give a chance to our negotiations. But as I have said before, our problem is not related to timing or methods. Our problem relates to substance. and in particular to the fact that the UK keeps on backtracking for its commitments in the political declaration. Of course, we know that this document, well known now, is not a legally binding treaty. It is a political declaration, but a political declaration agreed at the highest level. Each word, I can tell you, each word, every comma was negotiated and agreed with the Prime Minister Boris Johnson and with the 27 member states leaders. This declaration was also endorsed by the European Parliament and approved by the UK Parliament. We now need clear signals that the UK is ready to work on an agreement that respects this document, both in the spirit and in the letter. Both in the spirit and in the letter. If we get this signal next week and make concrete progress in July, all the better, all the better. But this will require progress on all topics. Whether this happens or not, the ball is in the UK's court. Already in the last rounds, we made a number of openings in key areas, but at the time, the UK showed no willingness to engage. In any case, the real moment of truth will be in October. That is when we will have to be ready to put a draft deal to the European Parliament and to the European Council if we want it ratified by the end of the year. Of course, the fact that there will be no extension of the transition period also has important consequences for our other two work streams. First of all, for the implementation of the withdrawal agreement, we need the UK to demonstrate real tangible progress on implementing this legally binding treaty in all its dimensions. In particular, on citizens' rights, where good progress has been made, but to remain vigilant to the situation of more vulnerable EU citizens in the UK and in our side. The member states also need to ensure the rights of British nationals in the same way. On the protocol number 2, on Ireland and Northern Ireland, where progress remains unsatisfactory. The common paper published a few days ago by the UK government is useful to help focus on what remains to be done. But the UK needs to move beyond good intentions and aspirations to concrete, precise and operational measures. We urgently need more details on how it plans to implement central elements of the protocol, such as customs, VAT, or standards for sanitary and phytosanitary protection and fisheries products. Together with the Vice President Maros Sefcovic, who co-chair with Michael Gove the Joint Committee on the implementation of the withdrawal agreement, we will continue to closely monitor progress on all these points in the next weeks. The correct and effective implementation of the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland is a premise to any future partnership. Secondly, and finally, we need to accelerate our preparations for the end of the transition period. Ladies and gentlemen, as I have stressed repeatedly, even with the best of deals, the UK's departure from the single market and the customs union will have important consequences on the 1st of January next year. The 4 fundamental freedoms, good, persons, capital, services, will no longer apply. Trade will not be as frictionless as it is today. And businesses must urgently prepare for these changes, which will happen automatically, mechanically, at the end of the transition. We have published a series of communication notices to explain all this. And let me say, these notices are mandatory reading for every industry stakeholder exposed to the United Kingdom. Finally, I know there are many questions about what will happen in case we fail to reach a deal before the end of the year. We are not yet there. A deal is still in our reach, and it is in everyone's interest to avoid a no deal, in particular the UK, which would be more affected than the EU. On the EU side, we will continue to work with respect and patience and determination with the support of the European Parliament and the unity of the 27 member states. This unity, Fabian, has only been strengthened by 4 years of continuous, open and frank dialogue and full transparency. Together, we will continue to seek the best possible outcome for our citizens and businesses, and to build a new, unprecedented and modern agreement with our friend, ally and neighbor, the United Kingdom. In your first remarks, Fabian, you asked me, should it be optimistic? And when I am asked this question, I remember the answer to the same question made by Jean Monnet a long time ago. Mr. Monnet, are you optimistic or are you pessimistic? And the answer was, at that time, it could be today for me, I'm not optimistic, I'm not pessimistic, I'm only determined. So I am determined.
Thank you very much for this overview. Many questions I could ask. I'll start with the question of extension. You've mentioned that the UK has decided not to ask for an extension before the end of this month deadline. But in the discussion, also in some of the member states, there's a suggestion that if more time is needed, if the UK were to come in autumn, more time would be found. What would your response be to that? Is it feasible that there could be an extension even later this year?
I know this concern, these questions, and legally speaking, I don't see, with the support of our legal service, how such a new extension could be feasible, except by the concrete application of the withdrawal agreement. That means that if we want an extension, eventually a precautionary extension, for precaution, or we need to decide before the end of this month. It is really clearly what had been planned and proposed by the withdrawal agreement. And we can use or we cannot use this possibility. And to be frank, we listened carefully to the Prime Minister, we asked the question, we mentioned our openness to this eventual extension by precaution, and the answer was no. And so I don't see how such a new transition or adaptation period could be possible and feasible, to use your word, for legal reasons. So the reason why we will increase the communication on the EU side to the preparedness and the readiness, because we have to be prepared to any options.
And in recent months, there has always been a debate in the UK about how movable the EU is going to be, what are the areas where the EU might compromise. And in the last few weeks, there have been some suggestions that the task force would actually be willing to make compromises in some areas like fisheries, but that you were being held back by a too strict mandate from the member states. What would your response be to that?
Obviously, we have to build compromise if we want to reach a deal. So we are ready. Once again, as I mentioned in my short speech a few minutes ago. We have make openness in some key areas. If people following clearly and the negotiation certainly know this openness, but we have not received the right answer for the UK side. So we will see next week. We are ready to work on operational and clever compromise, but not at the price, never at the price of any unraveling of the single market, never. So the UK, we know the UK red lines, we know these red lines, and they have to respect our red lines. No compromise at the detriment of the single market, no compromise at the detriment of our autonomy of decision. We respect the sovereignty of the UK, they have to respect our sovereignty. Nobody will fix the condition for the access of our market except the EU itself. For the people, for the product, for the data, for the financial services, nobody else. So this is the point, and we need, because of the proximity of the UK, a level playing field framework which works, because we are open but not naive. So Fabian, you mentioned the point of fishery. Everybody knows and must recall and remind that there will be no trade agreement without a fair and balanced agreement on fishery. We are ready to work, but for the moment, on fishery, the position of the EU is very strong. Some say maximalist. No change. The position of the UK is strong. Total change. If we stick on these two positions, there will be no discussion on fishery, no agreement on fishery, and so that means no agreement on trade. It is the reality. So we are ready, and I mentioned my openness to work with my team and DG Mare on a mix of parameters to find a compromise. If the UK stick to this position, there will be no discussion on fishery and no discussion on trade. We are open to find compromise in the framework of my mandate, and I have enough trust of the member state and the parliament to find the margin of flexibility.
Coming to that deal or no deal at the end of this year, you were talking about having an intelligent and reasonable agreement, but isn't the reality that even if we do get an agreement, it will be rather minimalist, given that the UK has set very clear conditions about how far the UK wants to go. Is there a significant difference between having that kind of deal and no deal at all?
I'm surprised by your question because no deal means control. In any case, deal or no deal, we'll have control for each and every good entering in the single market immediately the 1st of January. Controls for good to protect the EU consumer, to protect the budgets, and national and EU budget, and to protect the businesses. But in addition to that, no deal means tariffs and quota. It is a huge difference with deal. In case of deal, we have control because it's rules to protect the single market, but we will have no quotas and no tariffs. Plus a certain number of other issues where we can find a shared and good approach for transport and for the cooperation in internal security. This is a huge difference between deal and no deal. I can tell you.
Expanding that discussion to the question of Northern Ireland, where clearly we have the land border. What impact would you see if there's no deal on the border of Northern Ireland? Clearly, it's not part of the trade agreement; it's part of the withdrawal agreement. But then how far do you see the risk of no deal for the situation there?
The protocol on Ireland, in Northern Ireland, is not for the negotiations. Huh? Mm-hmm. The protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland is included totally, entirely inside in the framework of the withdrawal agreement already ratified by both sides, the UK Parliament and the EU Parliaments, and approved by the 20 member states and by Boris Johnson. So there is no negotiation at this point. That means that in any case, deal or no deal, this protocol must be and will be implemented in the best way, and we are ready to cooperate with the UK authorities. It is clearly the work done by Michael Gove and Maros Sefcovic and all our teams to be sure that this protocol will be operational at the end of this year. And to be frank, we will not wait at the end of this year to check this point, to be sure the right implementation. So we spend a lot of days and nights with the UK teams, first with Theresa May, after Boris Johnson, and the Irish government, and also the Northern Ireland leaders. I always say, Fabienne, in Ireland, and this point is very serious, it's not about the goods and border or trade. It's about people, the peace, which is fragile and recent, 20 years. So our common duty, our common responsibility, and exactly what we reach with Boris Johnson in this protocol, is to assure the conditions of peace and stability in Ireland. That means no border on the ground. That means all Ireland economy. That means respect of the unity of the customs territory of the UK, including Northern Ireland. That means checks and control to protect the single market. I know the sensibility of this issue, but now we are on the stage of the technical implementations of these checks and control, and we are ready to cooperate in good faith with the UK authorities. And I think we have to do an effort on both sides to de-dramatize these checks and control and this condition to ensure the right implementation of the protocol, because it is in the interest of the peace, first of all, and the economy of the Northern Ireland and the totality of the island. So this is my feeling.
But the question here from Errol Levy on the prospect for a positive and impactful relationship in areas related to foreign policy, particularly cooperation in development, security, and defense, knowing that the UK has excluded these areas from the negotiations. Where do you see that debate going?
Once again, I want to be frank and sincere. I take note of the decision of the UK not to engage any negotiation on the issue of foreign policy, defense, space policy, cybersecurity, and cooperation. I regret this decision because if you look clearly at the political declaration once again, you can see many paragraphs dedicated to this issue, because it is our common interests. But we cannot negotiate alone. Huh? I am ready to negotiate with myself, but it's not. But it's not the purpose. So I know it is our common interest. I've been the French foreign minister, so I know that it is our common interest to build a strong cooperation, respecting our sovereignties, about, for instance, the political cooperation dialogue in the United Nations in New York, about the policy of sanctions, about the eventual participation, if the UK wants to do that, to certain number of external operation of the EU. And I remember, not so far, the very clever and efficient leading role of the UK for Atalante, for instance. We need a cooperation framework for the services. We need to cooperate against the threats of cybersecurity and many other issues, and cooperation in Africa. It is our common interest. UK does not want to discuss now. It will be for medium or long term, and we remain open to negotiate immediately. I'm ready to open a new table of negotiation on this issue. And if it is not the case, we will see later. So there's a reason why, looking at the content of this political erosion, we are not able, and we will not able to do everything in 4 months. We will try to reach an agreement on the key issue, what I call the fundamental issues for trade, including fishery and level playing field, for transport, different kind of transport, for internal security, and we will take the time after, probably somebody else, to continue the negotiation on the other issue, to complete the comprehensive framework of this unprecedented partnership. But I am a little bit disappointed at the fact that so strong and important and influent country as the UK, in any case, will remain member of the Security Council in New York, with such a defense national policy, with such an efficient diplomacy, is not ready for the moment to cooperate with the EU as such.
Thank you. We will now open up to some questions from the audience. I've got a number of written questions, but I'll try 2, 3 audio questions. I think James Crisp had a question.
Yes, thank you, Fabian, and thank you, Mr. Barnier. Could you give me an example of one area where the negotiations have gone well, please?
And maybe collecting a couple of questions. I can't see at the moment whether there's a hand up. Otherwise, I'll pick from the written ones. From the written ones, there's a question here about in what areas, and that follows on from James's question, in what areas do we actually have progress, and what are the main sticking points? Where are we seeing difficulties? And in particular, a couple of the issues mentioned here are the overall architecture and internal security. And
I did not understand. I did not see and understand who asked these questions.
We have a number of written questions from different people.
The first one.
It was James Crisp.
James. Good afternoon, James. Yes, we have fortunately many areas where we have progressed together with the UK. For instance, the nuclear cooperations. For instance, the participation of the UK to the Union programs, and many others. For instance, for the point mentioned just right now for the internal security cooperation, I can tell you that on the objectives, we have more or less on the same line with the UK. I'm speaking about what we can do for the security of the citizens on our side through Europol, Eurojust, Prüm, PNR, and so on. On the objective, I can tell you that we are not far from agreement, but we have some fundamental problems for the operationality or the implementation of these objectives, because in some area we need a clear reference to the Court of Justice when the interpretation of the EU law is concerned. We must and we will have a reference to the Court of Justice to the protection of the citizens. We have no way to do another road. And we need also a clear confirmation of the UK of this commitment to the values and the principles of the European Convention of Human Rights. So there is fortunately several sectors where we are not far from agreement.
Then we have a question from Sebastian Remoy about the overall structure. Are we any closer on an agreement on the overall architecture of the deal? And another question, and this one is audio from Sam Fleming from the Financial Times. Sam will unmute you.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Can you hear me okay? The question was on the level playing field. Basically, how
are we speaking?
This is Sam Fleming from the Financial Times, Mr. Barnier.
Oh, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hi. The question was on the level playing field. In essence, how far are you prepared to go in a compromise on the issue of state aid? Clearly, because you said you're open to the idea of compromise, the EU starting position is clearly full alignment by the UK with EU rules. Where's the flexibility in that, and how far are you willing to adapt that position in order to reach an agreement on level playing field, given what an important area and what an important blockage it is in these negotiations? Thank you.
So, on the first point about the governance, what we call the single framework of the future governance of this. I want just to recall to the member states that the Parliament are very attached to an effective and efficient overall governance framework. And nobody has to be surprised, because if you look at the part 4 of the political declaration agreed by Boris Johnson, it is written about the structure, paragraph 118, the future relationship should be based on an overarching institutional framework covering chapters and linked agreements relating. So we know that there is specific structures of agreements for not the same thing, speaking about fishery, trade on goods, aviation, road transport, or internal security. But we need, and we will have, horizontal leverage of governance to ensure efficiency. It will avoid the duplication and overlapping of parallel structures, which have proven to be very difficult to implement. And the Swiss example shows well the downside with such an approach, and global overarching agreed by Boris Johnson in principle a few months ago will ensure greater coherence and transparency. So we will insist on having an overall framework. And it is a point today of divergence, and we will need at the end of the road, if the UK wants an agreement, to this overarching institutional framework. I'm sorry perhaps to disappoint you about the level playing field, but the difficulty of this exercise for me today, 4 days before the next round, in the heart of the negotiation, is to speak frankly with you, to be as sincere as possible, as precise as possible, but we are in a negotiation. So let me just be clear. I don't want publicly comment, even if I'm ready to be kind with you and with your newspaper. I don't want to intervene and to enter in the details. We are ready on this point, as well as for the fishery issue, for the governance, for some other issue where we are divergent, we are ready to work on landing zones respecting the mandate of the EU. And this point is key for the 27 member states because, once again, what is at stake, if I may say, if I may just show you one of my new favorite slides. I don't know if it could be the new one, not the stairs, but the balls now, the balls. You have two axes. One showing the proximity, the geographic proximity. With the EU, we are there. And the second one is about the volume of our economic relation with the member states, the third countries. So on this slide, we have put all the balls showing the different cases of economic relations, trade relation, free trade agreement with many other third countries. You see that many of them are very far geographically, Canada, obviously, Japan, Korea, and less important by the volume. And this is the European countries in the continent, in particular Switzerland, Norway, and UK. UK is there, here. And you see clearly that the UK is in a unique situation compared with all the other third countries in the world. Unique by the proximity, not unique because Norway is not so far, but there is 0 kilometer between the single market in Ireland and the UK, 0 kilometer. And 32 kilometers between Calais and Dover. And unique by the volume of our exchanges. This is the reason why the free trade agreement with the UK will not be exactly the same that with the other third countries. We are open. We have offered, it is the very first time in our trade history, zero tariff, zero quota for the FTA with the UK, but we are not naive. And we need to be sure that the trade with the UK will be, in the long term, free and fair. This is the point about the level playing field. And to be frank, I'm a little bit surprised that the UK is not ready to engage in this point with us. And at the same time, when I look carefully to the mandate written by the UK for itself, for its negotiation with the US, with New Zealand, or with Australia, the UK seems to be ready to build a framework of level playing field with this new third country for them, and not with the EU. And at the same time, we are totally closed. So we are ready to work in the next few days and in the next few weeks. We are ready to work on an operational and credible framework of level playing field, but it must be credible and operational. It is a key point for us. Please, thank you for your comprehension, but I don't want and I cannot now, in the middle of the negotiation, enter in the details.
Thank you. We are rapidly running out of time. I'll allow a quick question from Nick Gutteridge from Sun, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you, Fabien. Hi there, Mr. Barnier. There's an idea that's been drawn up by some British MPs on the level playing field, that you base the future relationship on current standards, and then the UK can effectively choose to go below European standards and accept rebalancing measures in reply tariffs or what have you. Is that an idea that can work?
Nick, thank you for this question. I'm well aware of the different ideas. There are so many ideas, and listen to you. I read you also carefully. I read the last, on this point, the last paper on the Spectator, and we work on all the ideas to be objective. But I will not comment on the specifics of these proposals. What I can say, though, is that the political declaration commits us to put in place robust mechanisms to prevent distortion of trade and unfair competitive advantages. Once again, these words are clearly the words approved, agreed by the Prime Minister of the UK in the paragraph 77 of the political declaration. And it commits us to upholding the common high standards applicable in the Union and the UK at the end of the transition period. This requires precise commitments and enforcement mechanism. The proposal tabled by the EU already allows either party to impose remedies in case the other deviates from agreed rules and standards. This includes, but are not limited to, tariffs. In addition, either party would have the right to suspend parts of the agreement, for instance, market access for services and investments or to public procurement markets. Finally, let me repeat again, the level playing field is not for sale. The level playing field is not for sale, even if we were to maintain tariffs and some goods. I listened to this idea in some speeches in London. The EU will still demand strong level playing field guarantees because it is a core part of our modern trade policy and because we refuse to compromise on our values to benefit the British economy. I know on this point the speeches and sometimes the polemics about the sovereignty. As a French politician engaged in the Gaullist party, I know what means sovereignty. I can also work on the concept of European sovereignty, as mentioned by the French president. But I know what means sovereignty. And in any case, we will respect the sovereignty of the UK. No question about this, no questions. And we ask to the UK to respect our autonomy and our own sovereignty. It is the game of these negotiations. What is at stake? It's not, I know also the polemic about the dynamic alignment. It's not to constrain another country to follow the rules of the others. I think that we can find a way where, at the end of this road, at the end of the negotiation, respecting our respective sovereignty, the British sovereignty on one side, the EU sovereignty on one side, we can use this respective sovereignty to agree on a level of regulatory coherence in certain fields and in certain issues, where precisely what is at stake is to avoid unfair competitions and to unfair competitive advantages and to avoid regulatory competition. So I think it is possible, in good faith, to agree on the fact with some enforcement mechanism. We agree to build this coherence, or sometimes it's equivalence, but the coherence, regulatory coherence, in some issue, in particular for the state aids issue. So I think it's possible. We will see, but it is a key point, as I mentioned, for the EU 27 member states and the Parliament.
Thank you for this frank exchange. There are many more questions, and indeed there were a lot of questions raised, which I didn't have time to go into. But I'm sure we will return to this. We will continue, of course, to work on Brexit, also in the context of the Brexit think tank group. So I'm looking forward to engaging with you again through that and through our routes. Of course, the next 3 months are crucial, and we will all be watching to see how things develop, and whether we will be able to move towards a deal as the German president has committed.
Just to conclude, I'm sorry to leave because I have a meeting now with many parliamentarians of the EU Parliament, and I have to be on time. Thank you very much for Fabian for this invitation. Thank you for all of you for your attention. I will be more than happy to continue and to meet you again, because I know, and once again, I respect the quality of your contribution. You just say that you will follow carefully the negotiation on Brexit. Me too. In any case, in the next weeks and months, and we hope sincerely that we will make progress in the next few weeks if there is a goodwill. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for attending this EPC event, and hope to see you all again very soon.